Thank you very much, Farhan. I also would like to join to what has been said by my colleagues, extending my gratitude to the Center for Strategic Studies for having organized such an important conference and such an important topic. So decisions in this field are very important, and MFA has held a policy of raising the awareness of the international community about this conflict for a long time, and it can turn into one of the elements of this long-standing policy of awareness raising. And all the speakers have provided a lot of details about illegal activities in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh and adjacent territories. I would like to touch on some main points. As you may know, these illegal activities, they violate, first and foremost, the national laws of the Republic of Azerbaijan. At the same time, they violate the principles of international law. According to the national legislation, any foreign company or any natural person which wants to work in the territory of Azerbaijan should get registered with the government agency, should get certain license for certain activities. But what we see, third parties, the legal entities and natural persons, they violate the national legislation of Azerbaijan and directly or indirectly participate in those illegal activities in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So directly or indirectly. And this is the violation of the national legislation, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. At the same time, it is the violation of the international norms and principles of the international law. And I would like to mention the Geneva Convention of 1949 on the protection of civilians during the wars, and then the documents on the land rights during the wars and so on. So all these documents are violated by legal entities and natural persons. So Armenia is doing the following. The aggressor tries to strengthen the occupation as a result of the ceasefire, tries to strengthen the status quo of occupation, strengthen its military presence in the occupied territories. We could observe this from the military operations or drills that we usually carry out in the adjacent territories. So we try to also change the cultural, historical monuments in the occupied territories. At the same time, they exploit very rudely all the natural resources, and the ecological laws are violated, which leads to the deterioration of the ecological situation, not only in our country, but in the region as a whole. One of the important points is the change of the demographic situation in the occupied territories and the illegal activities in this direction. Armenia resettles people from the other countries to the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, and mainly from Syria, the Middle East countries. Population of Armenian region are resettled to the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. So, what it means? It means they want to increase the number of Armenians in the occupied territories and not let the millions of Azerbaijanis who lived historically in their own territories to come back to their territories. So they are Armenia is violating the international humanitarian law. And They try to bring the curtain of humanitarian activities for the illegal activities that they're holding there. So, like, we have people living there. All the activities are of humanitarian character. We help them, and so on. On the 19th of December 1991, the General Assembly of the UN adopted the resolution of the coordination of humanitarian aid to the people under conflicts, and which has the rules how the humanitarian aid should be provided in this situation. So the aid should be humanitarian in its stance. It should be unbiased, neutral, and should be agreed upon with the country which receives this humanitarian aid. And it should respect the territorial integrity, sovereignty of the countries. So these activities, therefore, have nothing to do with the humanitarian aid. So another point on the demographic change. As you know, the Minsk Group, OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs had two missions in 2005 and 2010 to the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, fact-finding and field assessment missions. Two missions were called like this. As a result of those missions, in the reports prepared by the co-chairs, we can see the facts on the demographic changes, on different changes which were made in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. And the reports, the co-chairs mention that the parties, and the main message goes to the occupied Armenian, that they should stop the demographic changes in the occupied territories. They should not happen. Otherwise, it will negatively affect on the efforts to the conflict resolution. But unfortunately, despite the report from the co-chairs like this, despite the facts that Azerbaijani side has been raising for many years, which Armenia ignores, such illegal activities are not stopped. Moreover, they are flourishing. They are even increased. So, recently a very detailed report was prepared from the open source. We can see them from the open source from the media of Armenia. They say that the occupant military forces have carried out the policy of demographic changes. It contains statistical data, and anyone can go into this open source and get this report. So this report has been raised as a good reference point by Azerbaijan to the attention of many international organizations. Another important point I've already mentioned is the issue of violation of human rights. Hundreds of thousands of the Azerbaijani populations have been made to flee their territories and lost their properties also. And therefore, any demographic and infrastructural changes will impede those hundreds of thousands of people to come back to their territories. So they affect very negatively on the efforts to conflict resolution. So we have some members of the parliament in our hall. So what we observe in the international organizations arenas, so they represent themselves as the main human rights defenders, including the government officials abroad. They do not speak about the human rights of hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis who have been forced to flee those territories. We have been raising these issues many times on different arenas because they have the fundamental right to live in the territories where they were born, on the land where they were born. And it doesn't allow them to come back to their lands, to use their property, to master their property. So we raise this issue all the time with the international community, that this is a very consistent work. And one may have a question, I believe we will touch on this in the QA sessions, what MFA is doing more specifically in this direction. In the occupied Azerbaijani territories, any illegal activities, economic or of different character, being held in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan are always high in the agenda of MFA officials, and also informing the international community about the real situation is a priority for us. From this point of view, Azerbaijan has bilateral commissions with different states. We raise this issue there. Illegal economic and other activities. This topic is always in the agenda of our bilateral commissions, joint commissions, and this is always mentioned as specific provisions in the documents that the joint commissions adopt. So now more than 40 documents adopted as a result of the joint commissions have provisions about the illegal activities in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan and responsibilities of the third parties, legal entities and natural persons. At the same time, I would like to mention the illegal visits, of course, and Hikmet Müəllim mentioned this, promoting the occupied Azerbaijan territories as touristic destinations and visits of the third-party tourists to these territories, organizing their visits to these territories. As you may know, those persons who have violated the national legislation and international law and made visits to the occupied territories as tourists, they are included in the list of the persons of non grata, and we want all the international community and countries to inform their citizens, so if they accept for these visits, what will happen after these visits. Because the research shows, our research shows that most of the visitors, including tourists, bloggers, who have made visits first to Armenia, and then they have been deceived and taken to the Nagorno-Karabakh area, to the occupied territory. So they are unaware of the consequences. And we call upon the different MFA bodies of the different countries to place these disclaimers, this information on their websites, refraining their citizens from going to the occupied territory, so that everyone is informed before a visit. So we always inform the other parties with their MFAs to place on their own websites. And the third important element is raising this issue in the bilateral and multilateral formats. This issue is always raised by the diplomatic corps of the Republic of Azerbaijan abroad with the international organizations, and I have to mention also OSCE. In the framework of OSCE and its Minsk group, they are responsible for the negotiations in this conflict, and all the issues I have mentioned, they are always raised with the OSCE. And our Azerbaijani representative offices always raise these issues on the illegal activities in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan with the OSCE organization, and trying to call upon the OSCE to raise this issue with the legal entities and natural persons of the OSCE member states. In the end, I would like to refer to what Mr. Mario Raffaele mentioned. He In the resolution of the conflict, he mentioned the political will necessary for the compromise. I would like to address one thing. It's more than 25 years since we have been using the international norms and principles. And more than 25 years, these territories have been occupied and kept under occupation forcefully. And that the fact that for 25 years we have been tolerating this and sitting at the table of negotiations proves this. Proves that Azerbaijan is always ready for substantial, constructive negotiations around the conflict, and Azerbaijan is the first interested country and has a political will in the negotiations. And as for the international norms and principles of the international law for the conflict resolution, so these principles are there. Our position is based on the international norms and principles of the international law. We want this conflict to be resolved in justice and in line with the international norms and principles of the international law, observing the 4 resolutions of the UN Security Council, and in line with the resolutions of all other international organizations that have adopted for this conflict. And all this information has been provided to the international community by the president of the country. Thank you very much for your attention.